The second week of rating is over. Today, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the current standings for DPS, for top DPS in the Sunken Temple. As you can see, overall, it looks like the Hunters, Rogues, Enhanced Shamans, and Warriors are way out in front of every other class by a large margin. Let's go ahead and see that over a range of one day. Looks about the same. And now let's change that to the 95th percentile. As you can see here, melee hunters are still the king of this raid overall, followed by rogues and then warriors, which warriors typically scale better at 60 as well as when they get more gear. So let's go ahead and take a look at the max percentile to see if that changes. And if you see here in the max percentile, now it's the time where warriors can really shine if they have an optimal group comp, they have full world buffs, they're playing the game and min-maxing it as much as possible. This is where you're going to see the Warriors start to gap everybody. We are only on week 2. Wait until the Warriors get full bis, and it will only get worse, in my opinion, at level 60. And you can see that they're doing, 30-40% more damage than the nearest caster right now. Casters are down extremely bad, and this does get worse at 60, guys. So prepare yourself for what is to come in Season of Discovery. Now, we'll get into the logs. We'll see how the Warriors are doing so much damage. We're going to see what the Hunters are doing to stay on top. And I do want to address that there were some class changes, some class tunings recently that came out. This post was a few days ago, and they said that throughout the beginning of Phase 3, we've monitored in-game progress and feedback from the community, and we'll be making these class adjustments. Now, these class adjustments have done almost nothing to even the playing field as far as DPS goes. We had a couple of quality life changes for Druid and Paladin. Shamans got nerfed slightly by their overcharge, was proccing way too much. The tank Shamans were overcharge was doing 80-90% of their damage, so I'm glad that is fixed now. That got nerfed by about 60, or I guess 1 second to 3 seconds. I guess that's what, like a 200% nerf. Focused attacks, a slight buff for rogues now generate 1 more energy with focused attacks instead of 2. Paladins, light grace rune got moved. Holy paladins definitely need some quality of life rework, so I'm glad to see that. Warrior, victory rush, nobody uses that, so it's no big deal. Now the life tap for your pets, this should help warlocks, pets, imps not run out of mana as quickly. Maybe can give them slightly more damage through their imps. Is that going to be enough to bring them off the bottom? No. These changes were hopefully just the surface of what's to come as far as class balancing goes. Let's take a look at what Agrin said. He did make a reply on Twitter to this post, and he said, "This is the first round of changes based on feedback rolling in. No, we'll probably not be majorly buffing and nerfing things for a bit longer. There's more to life than the Warcraft logs graph, and we plan to be a lot more deliberate with the changes in this phase to avoid whiplash where possible." Now, this term whiplash, I guess, refers to buffing and nerfing classes where people kind of ping pong back and forth, and we swap a bunch of people who are on the top DPS. I think it's fine to have certain classes be the top DPS for a phase. And so I agree with him in regards to avoiding the whiplash. But there is a major issue at level 50 in SOD with all melee being the top DPS that do scale better than the range. So they will continue to out DPS them even worse than they already do now. So minimizing that gap would make me happy, if, at least if Agrin would come out and say like, hey, we plan on trying to make casters competitive with melee. I would personally like that. I mean, I'm already re-rolling Warrior, so it is what it is. If you can't beat them, join them kind of thing. I did have high hopes that maybe casters would be competitive at least a little bit more in Phase 3. I didn't expect them to be competitive, and I don't expect them to be competitive in Phase 4 unless the dev team decides to drastically make some changes to the class design and the way that warriors and melee in general interact with weapon damage, world buffs, and their scaling. So let's take a look at some of the individual logs for the top damage and see about how much more damage certain classes are doing at the top of their performance. So if we take a look on page 1, there are only melee DPS still on page 1 of the logs. Majority of the players on page 1 are hunters. I imagine because they're a more simplistic class to play, they don't require as much, I would say, as much catering as a warrior does in order to parse. So if we take a look at page 2, there's a couple of feral druids. I mean, there's 1 or 2 ret paladins in here. But for the most part, you're not going to see any casters here in the top 300 players in the world. There's no casters. And matter of fact, now it's actually getting worse. There were some casters in the top 400. Okay, here's our first caster in the top 500. He's rank 415, and he's doing about 1,000 DPS per boss. And just to give you, if we go back to page 1, everyone on page 1 on average on every boss is doing nearly 1,500 DPS. So that's roughly the top warrior versus the top mage. He's doing more than 1/3 more damage than the top mage. So let's see what the warriors here are doing in order to parse so well. Alondo is obviously known for being the top warrior in the world in pretty much every patch. He does literally everything that you can possibly do in order to parse, so there'll be no expenses spared when it comes to him. I wouldn't even be surprised if this guy had a Crusader enchant on his weapon or something like that. He's got +4 weapon damage and a counterweight attack speed for his offhand. He's using Thrash Blade in the main hand. He's sometimes using a two-handed weapon here. So it looks like he's swapping back and forth. And then he's using the Legionnaire's offhand sword in his offhand whenever he swaps between Fury and arms. Okay, and a lot of his damage here you'll see on the breakdown is going to be, some of it is Sapper, Dragon's Breath Chili, and that's pretty much all that he's using on top of his natural kit. Dense Dynamite whenever, I guess, his Sappers are on cooldown and the fight lasts long enough. Yep. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at an individual fight here. The first boss, he's able to do 3,100 DPS. And it looks like the majority of the damage is going to be heroic strikes, deep wounds, slamming on cooldown, and big executes in the execute window. 4 casts of hamstring. So pretty standard charge here. Pretty standard. He's using Thrashblade and Legionnaire Sword. It looks like on a pure single target fight, Alondo, he might be using, he's going Fury here with dual wield in order to do the maximum amount of single target damage. Let's take a look at an AoE fight like Aranicus. And you can see he'll be using Parasomnia here, which is his two-hand sword. And there'll be probably some sweeping strikes, some cleaves in here, and some whirlwind damage that he's sneaking in. He's able to do, on this fight, he's able to do 1.2k DPS, which is a lot more realistic for warrior damage in this patch, I think. Let's take a look at what a mage is doing on Aranicus. He also doesn't have recklessness up on this fight. I think he saves it. So let's take a look on Aranicus. Alondo's number 11 on this fight. We might see some mages on the top 100. No, we do not see any mages on the top 100. And there's even ads on this fight. Maybe mages would have been able to compete before the nerfs when the ads lived longer. But now that the ads have no health and there's just not very many of them, it doesn't even look like mages can compete on this fight either. Okay, so Synapse. There's obviously no warlocks anywhere, but mage is right here. Number 270. Mage is doing 1.1k on Shade of Aranicus. Number 1 damage on this fight is a Shaman using Maelstrom and Chain Lightning is what it looks like. Lava Lash, Storm Strike, using the decay card trinket. This is doing 3% of his damage. The Dark Moon Fair card. Magma Totem for AoE, Wind Fury Weapon. Yeah, and then just hitting Chain Lightnings whenever he procs his Maelstrom. Good. The Hunters are not doing anything crazy. It's just Raptor Strike, Flanking Strike occasionally. 10 casts of Flanking Strike, 47 casts of Raptor Strike, and occasionally spamming some Wing Clips in there. So the Hunter rotation looks fairly simple. It doesn't even look like he's using Cleave to cleave the ads. This is pure single target damage mainly. And he's doing 1.2k DPS. So yeah, Enhancement Shaman, Warriors, and Hunters with a couple of Rogues sprinkled in there. That looks like what most of what Warcraft logs looks like right now. It doesn't matter if it's a fight with ads or if it's just a pure single target fight like Hakar. Looks like Warriors have started to pass the Hunters on Hakar. Last week it was pretty much all Hunters, and now we do see a lot of the Warriors starting to rise above them as they're starting to get gear. Let's see if there's anything special for pure single target that Dwarfy's doing. It looks like he's using Mortal Strike here, so he's using a two-handed weapon. He's went all the way down the arms tree, and he's using Parasomnia. So there are some fights, it looks like, where Warriors are using Fury, and there's some fights where it looks like they're using a two-handed weapon. This fight is nearly 3 minutes long, and that might have something to do with it. Maybe the two-handed weapons have a better sustained DPS, whereas a fight like a Talarion is a really, really short fight, 40 seconds, and maybe some players have decided to go dual wield for those fights. Alondo does a lot of damage on this fight, and he's going dual wield. Whereas Dwarfy is using a two-hander, he's doing 2k damage. I think Alondo's doing 3.1 on this fight with Recklessness. Yeah, so for short single target fights, it's looking like maybe Fury might be the meta. And for a longer fight, it could be... Let's check what Alondo's doing on the last fight as well, just so we can have that for comparison. Change this to Avatar of a Car. And let's see if Alondo is going... He's going Whirlwind Slam Execute, so he might actually be dual wield here. He is. Pure single target, it looks like Alondo's going dual wield, and then for whenever there's cleave, he goes a two-handed weapon with sweeping strikes. I guess there's not too much more to go over today. All we can do is see what the devs are going to decide to do moving forward. We'll see if they decide to make some changes to casters to try and make them competitive. They need about a 30% buff at this point in time to compete anywhere in single target. There's hardly any multiple target fights in this raid or even ads on any of the bosses. So mages who can traditionally keep up on multi-target fights are not able to be competitive in this raid. They have addressed that they're not planning on making too many changes, and they want these raids to be easy because it's a level up raid. We'll see if that continues at level 60 in Molten Core. If you enjoy this type of content, I'm going to be doing one of these videos every week, breaking down some of the top DPS logs on Warcraft logs, figuring out if there's any new tech, and seeing how the devs are balancing the classes. Shoot me a follow and check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/Sardako, and I'll see you next time.